Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive in 5 podcast. I hope you are doing okay and are having a fab day so far whenever you are listening to this. Have you ever driven somewhere and then got there and had no recollection of driving there? Like you've got in the car and suddenly you've arrived at your destination, you're like, I don't remember what route I took to get here. Like there's a whole chunk of your life missing. That is how I felt literally when I hit burnout. I was actually, great timing, I was on a call with a client today who had some of the symptoms of burnout. And she was talking about one particular thing that she noticed, which was feeling like she spent every evening in a sort of fugue state, like not present, like the world was sort of happening to her and she was kind of like a zombie moving through it. And that description of a fugue state, that summed up that feeling of burnout, or how it manifested for me completely. And I have been in proper burnout twice. I have been near on the edge of burnout quite a lot. I think it's a symptom of my corporate career is that I spent a lot of, pretty much every role I did, I hit a moment where I almost burnt out. But there are two instances in my life where I properly hit burnout. Once in my corporate career, quite early in my corporate career actually, and once in my coaching career. And I'm going to tell you about both because they were slightly different. That feeling of being like a zombie is in both of them, but they were quite different. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the circumstances that led to that burnout and how it manifested for me. And what I'm then going to do in the following episodes this week is talk a little bit about how you can actually handle burnout. But I think it's important to bring to life what burnout looks like because it's talked about a lot. I see it a lot on sort of corporate social media. I hear about it a lot in terms of workplace well-being schemes and stuff, but I don't think anyone actually talks about what burnout looks and feels like. So I'm going to explain to you how it looked for me in two very different circumstances. So the first one was maybe 8 years ago. I can't actually remember when it happened exactly, but because it was sort of a phase that kind of built for quite a while, but it was about 8 years ago. And I know which role I was in. So I had just started my first job after my graduate scheme. And a bit of context here. So I did a graduate scheme that was 3 placements, and I actually rolled off the scheme early to go into this job. I was offered this job through a whole bunch of circumstances that I still, at some point I will tell the story, but I don't fully understand how I got offered this job. Basically, I networked a little bit too hard. I got offered this job that I was in no way qualified to do. I had a lot of the raw materials that would have made me good at this job, but I had none of the skills. No, I had the skills. I had none of the experience or the knowledge to go and do this job. Essentially, it was a banking analyst role. So it was looking at how a bank operated and drawing conclusions and making strategic recommendations. Really interesting job. Genuinely, I learned so much from it, and I still use a lot of the stuff that I learned just in my reading of the news and things like that at the moment. Obviously, I don't do a lot of banking anymore. But at the time I got offered this job, I didn't actually know how a bank worked, which given that I worked in one was a bit ludicrous. Why they offered me this job I have no idea, but I had the raw materials and the raw skill set to go and do it, but I just networked way too hard. And when I started this job, it was such a step up. My salary doubled overnight, which maybe should have been the first clue that it was going to be a big step up. And I had gone from a pretty low-key graduate role where I got a day off a week to go and do my professional qualification, where I could work from home quite a bit, and my boss was really sweet and just loved the personal development side of his job and really wanted me to just be like a great human being, into this job that was like walking into the lion's den. It was a very high profile. It was the group's strategy team. We I was maybe 2 away in the reporting structure technically from the CEO. I used to have to email the CEO, which still blows my mind that they let me do that at the age of 20, what would I have been, 22, 23? And I was under a huge amount of pressure in this job. It was a massive responsibility and a massive step up. Add to that I was at the time living in Leicestershire and working in the city. So my commute was 2 hours each way on a good day. I also had an £8,000 season ticket for the train, but that's a whole other story. That was a very complicated loan to try and organise. I couldn't work from home. The job, my boss at the time did not allow us to work from home. That was not an option. We had to be in the office 5 days a week. My days were a minimum of 12 hours on a low key day. I spent a lot of time sleeping on my sister's floor when the trains got cancelled, and the job was really hard. And every quarter, the way the job worked, every quarter we had to basically like report on the results of other banks and then draw conclusions from that and write papers for the board, and give our reviews and recommendations and things like that. And that basically meant when the bank's results were every quarter, would spend about 3 weeks being in the office maybe at 6 o'clock in the morning, and probably not finishing until maybe 8-9 o'clock at night, and then I'd have to commute on top of that. So there was a huge amount of sort of physical pressure on me in terms of the amount of responsibility that I had, and in terms of the actual just amount of stuff I was expected to do. And I'll be honest, I spent a lot of that, the burnout hit me in the first sort of, it was after the first banking results of that year. So it would have been like maybe March, April time, around this sort of time of year, where I remember going into the office and kind of getting through the results period. And I wasn't sleeping very much during the results period because I was having to get into the office so early. And then the results finished, we submitted the papers, and we kind of went into what was kind of our down period. We'd have like 6 weeks where it'd be quieter and then it would get busier again. And in that 6 weeks, I still couldn't sleep. So I was still waking up as though I was having to get a 4:30 in the morning train. I was going to bed, Harry'd fall asleep, and I would just lie awake, like thinking. My brain was like constantly going. I could not think about anything other than work. And that was the first warning sign for me, was that I just could not sleep no matter how tired I was. And I would sit on the train in the morning and I just felt like a zombie. I used to walk to the station. It was just around the corner from my house. It was super easy, and I used to get lost. It was literally, I had to cross the road and I would get lost on the way to the station. I reached a point during that burnout period where I could not think beyond the next hour. I literally could not even compute. I remember one time a friend messaged me in that kind of down period after the results and said, oh, like now results are done, do you want to like meet up for a drink? And I was like, oh, when? And she was like, oh, well, I'm free this evening. And I could not even remember like what day of the week it was. My brain just could not compute that far ahead. I was thinking about the next email, the next thing. I felt like I was living in a bubble and nothing existed outside of that bubble. And then what happened was I kind of hit like, all of that happened like to me mentally, if you like, and I was having the lack of sleep. I also was absolutely starving hungry, but also nauseous all the time. I actually thought I was pregnant at the time because I felt so rough. And I then hit the physical side of it. I then literally woke up one day and I was just in agony. I was in so much pain. My gut was just, it was horrendous. I felt so sick. I had a really upset stomach. My IBS flared up to the extreme. I've never had a flare up that bad since. And I ended up having to take about a week off work. I got signed off for a week, and then I came back in, had a conversation with my my line manager, and kind of said like, I'm just going to need a little bit of time. Like, I'll be better for the next results, but I'm going to need a little bit of time of like just maybe slightly lower key days. I still couldn't work from home. That's a whole other issue. And I eventually got through it and I came to the other side of it, because I was kind of forced to stop. My body literally sat there and went, nope, you have got to stop. And the causes of it, now I look back on it, are kind of obvious, right? I had absolutely no time to care for myself. My diet was terrible. I actually have a MyFitnessPal entry from that period of time where I put into my MyFitnessPal that day 12 chicken nuggets and half a bottle of Chardonnay. That was like what I was eating. I got home from work, drank half a bottle of wine, I went to bed, having had some chicken nuggets on the train, and that was all I ate all day. I was sleeping terribly because of the results period, and that exhaustion got the better of me. I know from subsequent experiences that I suffer with insomnia when I'm stressed, and it tends to be a warning sign that burnout's on its way for me. And I was just under an incredible amount of pressure and stress, and I had no way of releasing that stress. I had no time, no ability to manage that stress. I'll talk tomorrow about the emotional sink model of stress, and that's how we kind of think about it within the Thriving Female Project, and why and how we can think about that. But for me, basically, my emotional sink was way too full, and I had no means of releasing that stress. The second time I had burnout properly was about 2 years ago, and it was a completely different experience, a completely different circumstance. And this time I had just left my corporate job. So I had handed my notice in my corporate job. I had then 3 months notice to work. I left my corporate job sort of 3 months later, and I had this weird experience where I left my corporate job and I went out to visit my sister in Singapore, where she was living at the time, just for like a sort of a bit of a holiday, working holiday out there. And whilst I was out there, I felt the beginning of what became my burnout. I while I was out there, I had a moment where I went into that fugue state that I talked about, that kind of zombie moment where I was in a shopping mall and I just felt completely disassociated, completely out of it. And I should have, and I also I got a stomach bug when I was out in Singapore as well, and my IBS flared up again. And I should have noticed the warning signs from previously, but I didn't. And I came back from Singapore, and suddenly, out of nowhere, I felt this incredible, like, zombie feeling come over me completely. And essentially what had happened was I had left my corporate job and I'd gone from having a really cushy paycheck, every month knowing how much money I was going to have, knowing that my mortgage was payable, to being self-employed and having all of that responsibility of all that pressure. Add to that, at this time was when the whole Liz Truss debacle blew up, and I got obsessed with the news, which is another warning sign for me that I am not in a great place mentally, as if I'm checking the news a lot. And I basically, like, my business really suffered off the back of the economic hit from that. And I had all of the same symptoms in many ways that I had the previous sense of burnout. I could not sleep. I was lying awake at night, just unable to sleep, my head racing, and that fugue state, that kind of zombie feeling. But the difference was I went from being absolutely laser focused on work and on my coaching business to being unable to work, to literally opening my laptop, staring at it, and just feeling unable to move. I would try and write content or, put together things for clients, and I would just be staring at my screen. It would take me 7 times as long as it normally would to do anything like I would do previously. And that's the difference, I think, between those two experiences of burnout, is that fight or flight. In the first experience of burnout, I was in fight mode. My brain was like, I can't think about anything other than work. Work is all I have to think about. And I was just so laser focused on it that I kept fighting through, and that meant I hit, and that kind of caused a lot of the burnout in my body to physically respond. In the second instance, I had all the physical symptoms and I didn't listen to the warning signs, and so my brain went into flight mode. It just ran away. It was like, I can't do this. This is too hard. This is too stressful. We can't do this. And so I lost all ability to focus. Both of those experiences of burnout were very different, but I know from having worked with a lot of professional women and from having done a lot of my own sort of study and work on this, that those are two quite common types of burnout. Either that sort of laser focus, can't think about anything else, this is all that matters to me, or that I just can't function at all. Always coupled with some form of feeling like a bit of a zombie, or unable to sleep, or unable to do certain tasks, and normally accompanied by some kind of physical symptom. I learned a lot from both of those experiences, namely how to handle it. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tomorrow, about a model of understanding stress and burnout and how we can approach it. So tune in for that episode tomorrow. And if you want to chat about anything I've just spoken about, if you have any questions, or if you're sitting there going like, oh my God, I think I might be burning out, please pop me a message. My inbox, my Instagram DMs is always open. I'm always happy to chat. And just a little reminder to end this episode that the Mortal Life program spots are open. The info is in the episode description. Calls are booking up. My diary's getting quite full, which is very exciting. You have until midnight this Thursday to inquire. So if you want to inquire, if you want to just find out a bit more about it, please pop me a message. That inquiry, there's no obligation. It's just your chance to find out a bit more about how the program works. Don't miss your chance though, because genuinely, once we get to Thursday, because of the level of kind of support the program provides, I'm not going to be able to do any more inquiry calls. So please do inquire if you want to find out more. I will catch you tomorrow to talk to you all about emotional sinks, which is a very weird way to end an episode.